Hi, and welcome to my brand new sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for July 2020. And I got a lot of stories to cover. I'm going to blab a bit, so I'm just going to launch right into it. My first story pick this month is Your Name is Oblivia by Vincent Torrado in Faya number 15. Toronto's story takes place in a bar called Sticks and Stones, S-T-Y-X and Stones, I love that, where the patrons can order memory-based drinks, meaning drinks infused with memories of specific experiences and emotions. Now, the deal is they can order 10 memory-based drinks and pay with regular money, but after that, they have to pay by giving up one of their own memories, meaning they'll lose that memory. The drinks are made and the memories harvested in a fashion by a bartender named Oblivia. And Oblivia tries to be a good employee. She tries to follow the strict rules laid down by the bar's owner, Mr. Edgewise, but she has a tendency to slip up again and again. She also can't remember how long she's worked at the bar, or what, if anything, she did before. Even when she's in her own apartment, she feels no real connection to the items there or the place itself. And when Oblivia connects with a customer who calls himself John, and does kinds of memory drinks, things take a turn. And this is a story that hits so many of my sweet spots. I love how it's set in a bar, and how well it captures the bar setting and the social aspects of being a bartender. And I love how it delves into the elusive nature of memories and identity, and how it explores how losing memories of our past might impact who we are, how we relate to the world, and how well we can understand ourselves and others. It's a story that will stick with me for a long time. My next story is also from Faya number 15. It's a great issue of that magazine. It's called The Black Menagerie, and it's by Andrea Isa Richardson. This is an evocative and intricately woven tale of magic and shape-shifting that plays out both in the past and the present, and that skillfully laces together horror, history, and fantasy. It traces the life and the changeable nature of a woman called Alta, who has lived. It's a story of desire and fear, and more subtly, perhaps, it's about power in relationships and in society. I absolutely adore stories about shapeshifters, and this one really delves deep into that subject. Richardson's prose has a gleaming lyrical quality and a kind of mesmerizing flow that is really outstanding. And this is a very deep story that is worth reading and rereading. Next up is The Limits of Magic by Samantha Mills from Apparition Literary Magazine. And I'm going to start with a line from the story. There is no magic that can stop a war. There are, of course, numerous ways that magic can start one. End quote. This is an epic fantasy tale that somehow fits into the size of a short story. It's about love and revenge, lost lovers and children left behind. It's about rebellion against an unjust and oppressive society, and maybe, just maybe, it's also about hope. Mills weaves a devastating and powerful tale of a woman who has lost almost everything in her life, but who is still willing to risk even more in order to try to set the future right. My next story is The Night Soil Salvagers by Gregory Norman Bossert at Tor.com. And I'm going to start with a quote from this story. But none of this is what the night soil salvagers do. Rises up. This is an utterly strange, utterly beautiful, and sublime story by Bossert. I don't even know quite how to describe it, except that you should read it and that it is the story of the Salvagers, the city they work in, the music they make, their exploits beneath and above the earth. And it's also, more specifically, a tale of a salvager named Parch, Florence, the woman the salvagers call our heart, and the antinode. And I quote, "The night soil salvagers keep a garden in an open space within the city. They did not create this space, though they have nurtured it. It was always there, inevitable, a rest in the rhythm of the city's beating. Florence called it the antinode." End quote. All I can say is read the story. It is gloriously strange and enchanting. My next story is Public Service by Julie Reeser at Daily Science Fiction. This is a story that is a wonderful slice of near-future science fiction that quietly and quite deliberately subverts a multitude of superhero tropes. Sure, there's a town in trouble, there's a hero that saves the townspeople, and there are bad guys getting caught. But what kind of trouble is it that they all need to be saved from, and how exactly is the superhero saving everyone? And maybe most importantly, who are those bad guys really? A gentle but incisive tale. Next up is another superhero story. Burn, or the Episodic Life of Sam Wells as a Super by A.T. Greenblatt in Uncanny Magazine. And I'm starting with a quote from this story. "Watch Sam burn, or sort of burn. Well, more like light up than burn, but only his head. Whatever. Sam's trying not to focus on the things he can't control, like the 24 people sitting in front of him watching him impassively, or that he's underdressed for his audition, or that this old community center is impossibly stuffy with a whiff of sour milk lingering in the air, or that this might be a terrible idea." End quote. So this is another excellent and subversive take on all those familiar superhero stories, and it's one that specifically takes on the idea of what happens when you gather up a group of superheroes in the vein of the Avengers or the Justice League. And it's about Sam, who thinks he might have what it takes to be a superhero. He even passes the required audition to join the superhero team, but what happens next is nothing like what usually happens in the movies or stories when someone gets elevated to superhero status. There's a gentle and darkly humorous undercurrent to this story, and an unusual vibe of everyday kindness and goodness under difficult circumstances that really appeals to me. Wonderful tale by Greenblatt. My next story pick is Recognition by Victor Laval in New York Times Magazine's Decameron Project. There's a link in the comments. Laval's story fits into our current pandemic world like a sharp knife fits between ribs. It's set in New York during the peak of the COVID-19 crisis there this year, and it's amazing to read a story like this with this kind of edge and depth while we're still in the throes of this pandemic. It captures the devastation and horror of what happened in New York in a subtle yet powerful way, focusing on a seemingly very small, very human story. It is pitch perfect, and there comes a moment in the tale when Laval twists the knife of fiction with expert precision, and it's a true goosebump moment for me. Next up is The Wasp Keeper's Mother by A.C. Buchanan in Kaleidotrope, and I'm starting with a quote from this story. "As she makes it out of the crowded city streets and onto the highway, Kathleen notices her daughter's ghost in the rearview mirror. She's expected that. It happens most times. What she didn't expect was how young Tamara looks. The girl on the back seat is barely 5 years old, the seat belt almost sliding over her head. Kathleen wonders if she should have brought a car seat, but Tamara's normally 17 or so when she appears. There's no way to know in advance." This is a ghost story about a mother who feels that she has failed in life, failed her family, and especially her children. Buchanan perfectly captures that terrible feeling of being stuck in a life that has not worked out at all like you planned, and still you seemingly can't do anything but continue on as you have before, unable to make things right. It's a devastating tale, full of quiet dread and despair, and beautifully written. My next story pick is Actually Nanine by Malka Older in Slate. This is a quiet, thoughtful science fiction story about Shristi and her rather old-fashioned robot nanny, Nanine. At the time of the story, Nanine is looking after Shristi's children, but long before that, she was Shristi's own nanny. Nanine can't quite measure up to some of the more newfangled nanny models like the ones Shristi's friends own, but there are other bonds and other features that might be of more importance than up-to-date technology. I love how deftly and perceptively the story explores the bond between humans and machines, and how that bond can affect people and maybe robots too. My next story pick is My Brother's Keeper by Casilda Ferrante in Unsung Stories. And I'm starting with a quote from the story. My brother Elijah is slumped in the chair, his hands curled into fists on the armrest knuckles inked with black script. One hand says evil, the other hand says good. I was beside him when he got those tattooed. He thought of me as the needle hummed, one brother evil, the other good. I don't know which one I am anymore. End quote. This is a terrific ghost story that is also a story about sibling love and hate, emotions twined tightly together here. It's set in an afterlife that is not at all what the characters in the story had imagined would happen after death. I love how Ferrante unfolds the tale itself and the motivations and emotions of its characters bit by bit, and how in the end we are in a much different place and with a much different resolution than I was originally expecting. Gorgeously written, devastating. My next story pick is The Wandering City by Usman T. Malik in Us in Flux. And I'm starting with a quote from the story. On a cool April morning, moments after the muezzin walks, sleep drunk, to Mughalpura Mosque, and before the discounted holometer at Lahore's Abdus Salam Quantum Center starts beeping, the city flickers at the edge of a Florida wetland and wanders into Lahore. Oh, this story is exquisitely wrought and gleams like a fairy tale. It's set in Lahore, Pakistan, where a strange city appears, and strange things take place around the new arrival. Malik himself describes the premise like this. A 9th century enchanted city appears at Shalimar Bagh, Lahore. How do Lahoris respond to this apparition? It's a fantasy tale with its roots in 1001 Nights, and it's thought-provoking and just wonderful. Next up is Degustation. I hope I said that right. I'm sorry, I was a little bit distracted by my birds in the background. Anyway, Degustation by Ashley Deng in Nightmare Magazine. And I start with a quote from the story. You are a spore, barely more than a twinkle in your many parents' breathing air. They are your family, among other things, living as a colony in the dim light beneath an abandoned office building. They fill the already damp air with the encouraging words of hopes and aspirations for you and your siblings. And though you are nothing more than a speck in the air, the sentiment is warm, just as the earthy mulch you settle into that embraces you like a blanket. Okay, so this is a brazenly strange, utterly weird, yet also somehow very relatable story about a person who isn't really a human at all, though they live most of their life among us. In reality, this person comes from people that pass for humans, though they actually grow like mushrooms and live in communities we never see. There's a deeply unsettling body horror element here, but what makes it special is how it depicts basically an alien among us who is trying very hard to work out how to pass for human, how to live with and among humans, and who is having some real trouble making it all work. In the end, their true nature asserts itself, and there is some peace to be found in that too. An unforgettable story. My next story pick is Carving You Out of Memory by L. Chan in Black Telephone magazine. Now, Black Telephone magazine is a new publication featuring dark literary communications. The first issue is available now and features stories from a range of authors, including this wrenching and quite awesome piece by Chan. There are golems, memories, and a past abusive relationships that are all at the center of the story, and Chan's beautifully crafted prose cuts deep. Finally, my last story pick for this month is Needles by Kali Napier in The Dark. Here we meet an abusive father, a mother who is trying to keep food on the table and the lights on in the home, and a daughter who is trying very hard to keep herself in check, to not make trouble or get into trouble. Now, this is a story that is quiet on the surface, but beneath there's a depth of pain and anger and determination. Maeve, the daughter, has powers of her own, but they are of little use to her when it comes to protecting herself or her mother from her father's wrath. But what Maeve doesn't realize is that maybe she doesn't quite see everything that is happening in her house. Excellent, well-crafted suspense and horror wrapped up in beautiful prose. And that was all my story picks for this month. There are links in the description for this video, and you can read the full text at curiousfictions.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back with another roundup of stories next month. Thank you.